Yeah, there we go.
Oh, I now I'm confirming the friend request.
Oh,
Look at me. My shame.
no worries. Turn this down. Good afternoon, everyone. It's Pastor KP here, and I'm with the guys. It's our regular Tuesday chat, and you know we're normally on here around this time to delve into a variety of things. So of course we have on here CJ, Pastor CJ.
What's going on?
Pastor Scott, and Pastor Thomas, Andrew Thomas.
Happy Tuesday.
And we have a special guest today. You know, in our previous chats, we've given a shout out to quite a few people, and one of the individuals that we gave a shout out to is the person that you see here, Pastor David Hamstra.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
He's the current pastor of the Alberta Conference.
Edmonton Central.
Edmonton Central SDA Church in the Alberta Conference.
CJ, you're on mute.
You can, what?
I'm saying he doesn't pastor the entire conference, but yeah, even though I'm quite sure that all the churches would love him to be their pastor.
You're too kind.
Edmonton Central SDA Church, right, in the Alberta Conference.
Thank you.
Just sorry about that, preacher. So in terms of a little bit of background about David here, you know, there's a lot to say, but you know, in terms of his studies, he has a BA in religious studies from Berman. He has his MDiv from Andrews University, and he's working on his THD at Andrews University as well, right? He has a blog that's called Apokalupto, you know, apokalupto.blogspot.com. You know, you can check out some of the things that he's written. And by the way, if you check him out on Facebook, you'll see the link to to Apokalupto, and also for articles he's written for Andrews University while he's there, right? Welcome once again, Pastor.
Thank you.
And we're more than happy to have you here, man. You know, in terms of the way we talk and the things that we do, you've already, before we went live, you see how we are and how we talk to each other. Very fluid conversation.
That's right.
In terms of you being here, so one, I mentioned that we, you know, when we're giving shout outs, CJ specifically gave you a shout out, and he made us aware of some of the things that you did, or one particular thing that you did while you were up there, right? You know, we're dealing with the social unrest right now, not just in the US, but also here in Canada, and pretty much all across the world, all around the world. George Floyd's death really, you know, brought to the forefront this situation that we've been dealing with in our society and even in the Adventist Church. So focusing on it in the Adventist Church, it once again forced us to look at this issue in the church, and we've been talking about it from various in different ways, right? And we wanted to hear about, you know, what you did out there with the whole Black Lives Matter, you know, messaging that you put up there. That's one. And two, you wrote some things, and we wanted you to talk about these things and help us to navigate these challenging waters right now as we're dealing with it, as Black pastors, as white Adventists, as Black Adventists. You know, we have a hodgepodge of things, right? But we We really appreciate you coming on and talking to us.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. Yeah, in terms of what we did, I would say it was kind of what the least you can do, perhaps. My associate pastor and I, and by the way, my associate is Robert Cinderellis. Good man.
Shout out to him, Rob. Shout out to Robbie.
Shout out to Rob. So we went to Black Lives Matter rally together. Rob made the t-shirts. And then the next day we were thinking, okay, what more can we do? And I thought, and I approached him and I said, hey, what would you think if we put the message Black Lives Matter on our church sign and just put a Bible verse underneath it? Jeremiah chapter 22, verse 3. I had got the idea of doing this from a pastor in Wisconsin who did this with his church. And Rob said, man, I think that'd be great. I said, well, good. I'll send a message around to the elders and just discuss it and see what happens. So I sent the message around. We got positive feedback. We had one elder who had some questions. I answered those questions and they said, okay, I won't object. And so we just went ahead and put the message up on our church sign. Let me see if I can just share a picture of that message real quick. I don't know if I will be able to or not. Let me see if I can find it here.
All right, go ahead, man.
Give me 2 seconds. I'm going to share a screen here.
And I think the pastor who from Wisconsin, was it Wisconsin?
It was Wisconsin.
Was it the same one who made a presentation to the NAB pastors last month?
I'm struggling to remember his name. Can you see that screen share now?
It's coming up.
Coming up, yeah.
Good. Stephen Hall was the guy in Wisconsin.
Okay.
So, yeah, that's just what we did there. And, we left it up for a while and, it's kind of a prominent, intersection in Uptown Edmonton. That's, the major hospital that you can see there in the background. So the tweet, got some good response. I put some hashtags in there for the community and, yeah, I think we just added our voice, really. That's all we did. Wasn't much. And then I think, going forward, we'll have to see what more we want to do in this area. I know Pastor Rob is involved in some conversations with some other community leaders. I've only got here in January and then the shutdown happened. So he's much more connected than I am. And I think honestly, it's good for him to take the lead in this area as well. So yeah, I don't know if you're, I don't have much more to say about that than that, but I think it's something that if a church's leadership is all on board, it's something a church could do.
Can I ask a question?
Go ahead.
Sorry, I know that we were talking about the positive, I guess, effects and things that did you get any backlash?
I was about to ask, yeah.
Oh,
I mean,
you were,
aside
okay.
from that one elder, but
Yeah, well, and the elder just had questions, so I won't necessarily call it a backlash. I just figured he just wants to be sure of what's going on, which is okay. But did you get any backlash, A, from community or B, from church community?
Honestly, no. The only backlash that we received was, I should say, a friend from the U.S. with more conservative political leanings messaged me privately and questioned it, and asked, "Hey, are you aware of what Black Lives Matter, the organization, is in favor of, and all this kind of stuff?" And so we had that question, but at the end of the day, I had to say, and I'm an American too, right? So, but at the end of the day, I had to say, look, this has a really different political valence up here in Canada than it does down there. In Edmonton, it was seen as kind of a, more of a moral statement than as a comprehensive political agenda. It was seen as, we need to make reforms in how we police people and things like this because we don't want to see folks dying or being abused, that kind of thing, rather than having a whole program for social revolution or whatever you want to call it, right?
Right.
Yeah. So that was it. The comments we received on Facebook and wherever were positive.
And I asked because, unfortunately, the phrase has attached to it a lot, but a lot of people, like you said, they associate the phrase Black Lives Matter with the organization, blindly realizing what the phrase says.
Mm-hmm.
It's a powerful phrase, and it's a powerful 3-letter phrase, which is catchy. And it says what it means. It doesn't say that we're a part of any particular organization or movement. And that's important. And I ask that because I know that I've encountered some people who have that semi-ignorant view when you use the phrase, the 3 words, Black Lives Matter. Yeah, so that's what I was wondering. I was curious.
I also told him I did a couple of things. Our ministerial association here at Edmonton had an apologetics weekend, and I presented on LGBTQ issues.
Mm-hmm.
And my first presentation had to do with political polarization and how we can navigate that as Adventists.
Mm-hmm.
So, I've been doing some education in this regard in my church, even in the short time I've been here. And also the scripture reference under the...
I was about to ask about it. Yeah, Jeremiah 20.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
It kind of makes clear what we mean by this expression, right?
Yeah.
Did somebody look it up, or shall I read it?
Read it. Go ahead, read it.
Read, preacher, read.
Okay.
Read the word.
Thus says the Lord, act with justice and righteousness. Deliver from the hand of the oppressor anyone who has been robbed. Do no wrong or violence to the alien, the orphan, and the widow, or shed innocent blood in this place. I think that makes pretty clear what we're trying to do with this message.
Sure does.
Right.
It sure
That
does.
one. Which passage did you just read? Because I'm looking at Jeremiah 22 verse 3. Which one?
I just read Jeremiah 22:3. This is like Sabbath school now. Do we have the right passage? No.
Oh, sorry. Yes, never mind. I have the wrong one. Never mind. I have the wrong. Sorry.
Or was it King James or NIV?
No. Right? Jeremiah is found in the Old Testament, KB.
Right. Dave, I have a question for you, man.
Sure.
So when you put up the sign and whatnot, did you get any comment comments, whether positive or negative, from the conference? Did they say anything in regards to that, or they just kept silent on the matter?
I received no feedback from the conference in that regard. Yeah.
No positive or negative.
No positive or negative.
That's good.
Is it though?
Well, I should say our conference did release a statement which condemned. Let me not speak too broadly for the conference, but I would say it was kind of trying to be even-handed, right? We don't approve of riots. We don't approve of police killings, was basically the statement. Right. And we were also informed by our ministerial department that we are allowed to speak up on issues of moral concern, social moral concern. Again, those are my words, not theirs. So that's probably it was general feedback, nothing specific to this sign.
All right. In terms of well, first of all, I mean, I don't know if John or Andrew, you have any other follow-up questions in terms of what David did over there, because I wanted to jump into the stuff that he's written.
Yeah.
He wrote one article called "The Four Adventism," and another one called "Being White." Right?
Love that article.
Yeah, no,
I'm not even kidding.
I just wanted to know if you and your church were thinking about doing more to engage your community, even your conference, on the subject, or do you feel like there's a limit to what you're able to do in Alberta? generally, and Edmonton specifically?
Yeah, our conference has undertaken what I would call education initiatives, primarily through the youth department. So I've called publicly for church entities to make an apology for racism. I think that would be a place to start. And I've asked my conference if we could look at doing the same thing. As far as our local church goes, as I said, my associate pastor is the one more taking the lead in this area, which he's African American, and I'm happy to have him do that. I'm very supportive of his efforts.
Nice.
But you know, as opportunities arise, I guess that's how I put it. I'm open to doing more, but we'll see what happens. I guess I'll have to put it that way, because I'm very new in this church. I started in January, and then the shutdown happened for us 10 weeks after I'd gotten here. So we'll see where it goes. It's primarily an immigrant church, and they tend to have a bit of a different social consciousness, which is not to say it's a wrong social consciousness, but it takes some getting used to on both sides, I would say. So we're still developing our relationship as pastors and church leaders and things like this. So yeah, we'll see what comes next. That's all I'll say. Does that make sense to you guys, or do you have any advice for me in that regard?
That makes sense.
No, I was going to say that you said that the church is predominantly immigrant now.
Yeah.
So it has gone through, the church, Edmonton Central must have gone through, I guess, a shift culturally as well too.
Wait, Edmonton Central is a wow.
Yeah, Edmonton Central is predominantly Rwandan church right now. And if you know anything about the history of Rwanda, that's a whole other kettle of fish, if you will.
Yes, it is.
So we also have, a good contingent of South Asian people who are quite active. We have Filipinos. We have some historic members from, really, it's always been an immigrant church. It started as a German Ukrainian church, right? Who, when that wave arrived in Alberta like 100 years ago or whatever. But so the people who've been here from that wave are they're older now, and their kids have gone to other churches more in the suburbs. Yeah.
All right. So in terms of the two things that I made reference to earlier, I don't know which one we want to delve into first. But I was looking at the 4 activisms, and then you had a graph, right? You can share it too once we get to it. Evangelical, apocalyptic, recovery, and social justice. And of course, in light of what we're dealing with right now, I was drawn to the fact that you had something to say from that. To be transparent, I was scrolling through some of the things that you've that you've written, but I didn't even realize that you had one called being white, right? But you read that one, Andrew?
I sure did.
Okay. So
yeah, well, first I want to say you're a great writer.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
And I'm saying that because you didn't just write with information, but you also you kept my attention, which is good. I liked it, really appreciated it.
All right, so let's deal with the 4 Adventisms first then. And,
sure.
And take us through what you're thinking, as far as what you're developing here, and then the social justice piece.
Yeah, when I teach the 4 Adventisms now, I usually talk about it in terms of 4 loves, just to start off, right? Right. In the Bible, of course, the initiator of love is God, right? And His love for us is where our love comes from, right? And we have lots of scripture references about God's love, but probably the comprehensive one is John 3:16. For God so loved the world, right? Like the whole creation is under his love. That includes you and me and everybody, and the natural world as well, which we don't really get into too much in some of these discussions, but that's very important to God is the natural world. But then God wants us to reciprocate his love for us. Right. And we do that in three ways, right? Which is in the two great commandments, right? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, right? This is, sorry.
Go ahead, no problem.
Okay, this is God's, our response to God's love that goes beyond any other things that we might love, right? God is worthy of love in and of himself. But that's not enough to just love God, right? If you say you love God and you hate your brother, you don't really love God, right? So you also have to love your neighbor. That's the I guess in our counting now, the third love. And then you love your neighbor as you love yourself, which is the fourth one, right? People who don't love themselves, I'm sure you all know this as pastors, find it really hard to be loving in any other dimension, right? And that's that can get to be an issue. So those, I think of it in terms of four loves, and that these four loves, we get into problems when we try to play them off against each other, because some of us, depending on where we are in life, are more attracted to one of these than the other. So this is part of a larger. This is actually one of the presentations I did on political polarization and Adventism. This is, you're kind of getting the end of it here. But we've got these movements within Adventism, right? These are movements that people can even take and go outside of Adventism if they pursue it hard enough and to the exclusion of others. Let me just define a few terms here. Where this whole thing is about how we as human beings pursue what is good, right? In the broadest sense, what is good for us. And we do it in terms of things that are good for us in this world. That's what we mean by imminent here. Not imminent, which means soon, but imminent, which is another sense of immediacy, the things that we can connect through extensions of ourselves, right? But then there are things, if you're a certain kind of Christian, you hold that there are things that are good for you beyond what's in this world, right? Things that are good. God is good in and of himself. God is good for us. And sometimes we have to give up things that might be good for us in this world in order to attain to things that would be good for us in terms of God, right? For example, I rest on Sabbath, right? When I'm even as a pastor, right? I try to rest on Sabbath, right? I can give up things that would otherwise be good for me because I want to experience the presence of God on his holy day. That'd be an example of a transcendent good. Whereas an Adventist who doesn't think of Sabbath as a transcendent good would say, well, Sabbath is really great. It's good to rest one day a week, but if you've got to skip it for whatever reason, I mean, that's okay. God understands, right? So there's transcendent, imminent, and then there's two ways that we achieve these goods, right? How do you get the goods in relation to yourself, right? Well, we have this justifying on the transcendent side and affirming dimension here, where we say we need to come to terms with ourselves, and really, a lot of this is about self-expression, right? Self-forgiveness, right? You're okay, right? This is very accepting, right? You need to come to accept yourself, and this is where this authenticity, the imperative to be yourself comes through, right? But there's a meme on the internet that says, be yourself unless you're Hitler, right? Then be somebody else. There's a limit to how much you should be yourself, right? And so we have this disciplining side as well, right? Where you need to be transformed, right? You need to be renewed. You need to, on the sanctifying, the transcendent side of this, and then on On the immanent side, we have various self-disciplines that are practiced, right? So now to relate this to the four loves, right? These folks, these evangelical folks, are all about how God loves us, right?
Right.
How at the cross of Christ, God did something that can't be reduced to anything else in this world. And if you accept that sacrifice for your sins, you receive pardon and you're good with God, right? This one answers the question, how can God live with me, right? God can live with me because of the cross and because of pardon, right? That justifies us, this justifying grace. Then on the other side, you've got your apocalyptic folk, right? Who are very much about how can I love God, right? You've got to love God in these various, obey that fourth commandment, right? To be ready for the second coming, because the kingdom of heaven is coming to us. And we got to be ready for what God has for us. You're not going to get there if you don't do certain things. Okay. You got to love God. All right. And these folks are answering the question now, how can I live with God? Right. A very important question to have an answer to. All right. Coming along here, you've got these our social justice folks, right, who have and need to have an answer to the question, how can I live in the world, right? This is, how can I love other people? How can I love my neighbor as myself, right? Well, the Good Samaritan parable has been preached by a lot of us who are interested in social justice right now.
Right.
Yeah? And they are interested not just in, the kingdom as we get ready for it when it will come in heaven, but how can we bring heaven now down to earth in some way, right? How can we live out the principles of God's kingdom in our life on earth? And for Adventists, this is a part of our ministry of healing, right? In Adventism, we have a three angels message that tells us how this transcendent picture of God's goodness and all that stuff. But we also have a ministry of healing that we go to, that needs to be connected to that in order to make it real for people in their lives today. So the social justice is about healing without. And here we have to answer, how can we love ourselves, right? And that's all about being authentic, finding a place where you can just tell people what's really going on with you. Yeah. And that's where we get healing within. We could talk a little bit then about the history of these things in the Adventist Church, because I think it's helpful for us to understand how Adventism has been conflicted on these issues over time. You have 1888, a big conflict here, right? Yeah, we had this fight in 1888.
That's right.
That's right. But then, and notice before I go along, notice I've picked terms for these that are bad words in certain parts of Adventism. All right, because I want to show how we need to get like, there's certain Adventists for whom being evangelical is just terrible, right? Especially the apocalyptic people and the social justice people. They're very skeptical of the evangelicals, right? Apocalyptic is a dirty word in some places. So is social justice, so is recovery, right? Which I've taken from the AA folks. Okay, so I'm trying to stress that we can come into conflict on these things, but that we don't have to, right? So we had this fight in 1888 here. Then we had a fight between the apocalyptic and the social justice with John Harvey Kellogg. Okay, because what Kellogg did was immanentize Adventist theology. Okay, sin was sickness, salvation was healing, and the sanctuary was the body. Okay, and God has to live in everything. That was, and they literally called it immanent back then, even back then. Really interesting book to read on this is John Harvey Kellogg and Biologic Living. It's a history of Kellogg done by a professor in Michigan somewhere. So what Kellogg did was try to say that, morality can all be collapsed into this ministry of healing. How do I live in the world? Well, you got to follow God's laws of health, right? And part of that for Kellogg was helping people to live a better life in the world through what we would today call social justice initiatives, right? He had his city missions and things like this. Kellogg him and his wife never had children, but they adopted many orphans off the street of Chicago. I mean, kids that they literally found in the sewer drinking alcohol and stuff like this. It was just kids from terrible situations. And they brought dozens of them into their home and raised them according to his laws of health. And he thought that this would, giving them this new environment and this new regime would transform these street children into functional human beings. The problem was it worked for many of them, but it didn't work for all of them, right? Some of them just never overcame their dissipation for whatever reason. But Kellogg said, if my program of health isn't helping these kids, and the problem must not be, with the program or with the kids or something. The problem must be that the race has been degraded. Okay. So Kellogg's social justice program ended up turning him into a eugenicist. He believed that, by the end, the Adventist apocalypse over God's law became for Kellogg a race apocalypse, where the white race was going to be overcome by the yellow race. If we didn't, yellows being the East Asians, right?
Right.
If we didn't, because he said, look at these East Asians, look how many people they have, and yet they're not living according to the laws of health like that I'm preaching, right? So they must be like, super hardy or something. And he believed that they were going to rise up and overwhelm white Christian civilization. So he preached, he ended up becoming one of America's foremost eugenicists by the end of his career. He believed that we needed to do selective breeding in order to strengthen the white race. He believed that we needed to uplift the black race. But, there was always that kind of hierarchy in his vision. So this to me offers some cautionary tales, right? Back in his time, eugenics was considered to be very progressive, right? Very forward thinking. And yet we now, with the benefit of hindsight, see that it had serious problems.
Dave, before you continue, you said that there's a book that we can look at that sort of identifies his perspective.
Yeah, John Harvey Kellogg and Biologic Living, if memory serves. Yeah. So we had this fight with Kellogg, and he ended up having to leave the denomination because he wouldn't back off of immanentizing Adventist theology. And then we went back to this fight next in the 1950s with questions on doctrine, and it culminated in the Ford controversy. And now I see that Adventism is coming back and having this fight again. Okay, just how much into social justice should we be, right? And how can we do that without compromising our other principles as Seventh-day Adventists? Finally, there's this neglected section down here, which Adventists used to practice in what was called the social meeting. Yeah. When you came to Adventist worship, the main thing was gathering together with a group of friends and telling them what your week was like, how God had blessed you, struggles that you might have had, at just being open and honest with each other and getting prayer and encouragement from your fellow believers. And Ellen White said that if a church ever leaves off the social meeting for a preaching service, it will wither spiritually and die. This was based on the Methodist class structure that John Wesley developed. That was the Methodist method, was meeting together and being really open and honest with people, having what we might today call an accountability group. All right. But we left that off for the preaching service in the Sabbath school. That's what that third leg of the stool of early Adventist worship is gone from our worship services now. Although some people try to bring it into Sabbath school, but it doesn't quite fit because it's like two different objectives. And
sorry to interrupt. Sorry to interrupt you there for a second.
Yeah.
I gotta go, guys. But it's been good. I'll catch the rest of it on the posted version. But it's good. I like what I'm hearing thus far. And it's good to see you again, my friend Dave. Blessings to you guys.
God bless, man. Take care.
Blessings, preach.
So I'll just do recovery here, and then we can open up a discussion or whatever you want to do. Recovery Adventism, that we got the social meeting back into in the Adventist Church through AA, Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous, in the 1960s and 70s, when Adventist church leaders realizing that these other approaches didn't help people with drug addictions. And so that's why I've called it recovery Adventism, because people who are in AA and NA talk about being in recovery, right? We got back those practices through the kind of secularized version of Methodism, because Alcoholics Anonymous, what they do there is basically descended as well from the Methodist class structure. And again, I think the problems that arise here is when one of these sectors wants to say, we have the answer that will solve the question that you're trying to ask here, right? Jesus has forgiven you, so why do you need to be worried about social justice? Or Jesus has forgiven you, why do you need to go and talk about your feelings or something? You know, any of these other quadrants can try to do that to the other. We get conflicted, and we end up with an Adventism that doesn't have the full answer to these existential questions. Yeah. How does that relate to social justice? Again, I think we're coming back into this conflict here of how can we hold transcendent values and at the same time have a meaningful response to the question of how do we live in the world such as it is. Yeah.
Just a question in terms of trajectory.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel you've created this model, and I suppose based on some of the readings that you've had in your research?
Yeah, full disclosure. This comes from reading Charles Taylor's A Secular Age. He's a Canadian philosopher who's done some of the foremost work on what secularism or secularity really is a better word means. So,
Charles Taylor, A Secular, what was the title of the?
A Secular Age.
A Secular Age.
A book I encourage every pastor to read if they can.
Okay.
Yeah.
He's a professor?
He's a philosopher. I think he's retired now, but he was at McGill, I think.
Okay, awesome. So very good work for a Canadian perspective.
Yeah.
Do you see this model as moving in a trajectory, or do we jump in and out of these four quadrants? For example, can we accomplish all of these, still be evangelical, still lead people to recovery, seeking, identifying who they are, and what healing that we need to apply as a church? Do we see ourselves also with the tension between apocalyptic as well as social justice? Is that a part of what we do as well? So in other words, do we move from one to the next, or is it something where we're encouraged to be part of all?
Yeah, my sense of this is that it's difficult to deeply pursue more than one of these questions, let me call it that way, at a time. But the key is to remain open to what people are finding here, right? As I pursue this, right? Am I still open to what's being said here and here and here? Right?
Very good distinction.
Yeah. So different churches, different individuals, different movements, right? These things become relevant to us out of our life experiences. As we go through different experiences, we feel the need to answer this question at a deeper level, right, than we had previously. And I've kind of encountered this in my life, right? I was raised very much with this kind of emphasis, right? And then I went to self-supporting schools and I learned this side, right? Yeah. And then, my parents kind of moved to a church that was more in here, right? So I went to college and I was going to this church and learning about AA and recovery and all that kind of stuff, right? And then as I got more into pastoral ministry, looking at things that were happening in my country with the Iraq War and stuff like that, I began to develop more and more of an appreciation here, right? But now I find myself wanting to come back to this one again and say, hey, it may be old and seem irrelevant to certain people, but there's a lot here that you need to understand. So, for me, it's been hard to like really delve deeply into more than one of these at a time. Maybe you're better at multitasking than I am, but Yeah, that's sort of how I look at it. Does that help answer your question or not really?
Yeah, it certainly does. I just wanted to hear your thinking on it. So
Yeah.
so feel free to jump on in terms of where we are talking about social justice as a church and how it relates to this model.
Yeah. Social justice, a phrase that isn't really native to Adventism, is it? I think it comes in from outside. It's not
Right.
like something if you do a search for social justice in the Adventist Pioneer Library or Ellen White's writings or something, I don't think you'll find much. But I think it's a good term for encompassing the way that we need to relate to other people in the world, right?
Right.
Because you're not going to find these are our Adventist distinctives up here, right? This is what we share in common with the rest of Protestant Christianity and certain forms of other forms of Christianity as well, right? But here we need to interact with the world, right? We need partnerships, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Ellen White said back when they were advocating, I mean, the big social justice move in Adventism, early Adventism, now reading that term back into it, right? We were activists for prohibition, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which I explained is not the same thing as a war on drugs, because prohibition did not criminalize use or possession. It criminalized the traffic in alcohol, okay?
Right.
So Ellen White was really into pushing Adventism there's a whole chapter in Ministry and Healing on how we need to lobby politicians. My words, not hers, but this is what she's saying. We need to go out there and persuade people and politicians to end this curse of the liquor traffic, right? The whole chapter in Ministry and Healing that's political, but everybody wants to quote her statement about how Jesus didn't go against earthly powers and things like that.
Right.
Some people only have one Ellen White quote, right? I like to see all of what she had to say on something. So when it comes to social justice, she was into connecting with what people needed at her time, okay? And what they needed was some relief from the scourge of alcohol that was breaking up families and ruining lives and things like this. And for her, that was so important that when the Women's Christian Temperance Union, which was the big partner in prohibition that Adventism had, right? We had people working with them. They were like, I don't know, the Black Lives Matter organization of temperance at the time, right? Prohibition, all that kind of stuff. When the Women's Christian Temperance Union came out in favor of a national Sunday law, Seventh-day Adventists were going, well, how can we work for these folks anymore, right? How can we partner with them anymore? They want to take away our religious liberty. And Ellen White had to write an article saying, no, prohibition is really important. Alcohol is ruining lives. We need to get on board with what they're doing, even if she wrote to an Adventist who was working for them and said, don't quit, right? We need that partnership because it's important, because this is a moral issue, basically, is what she was saying. So when it comes to certain select moral issues that tie in with Adventist teaching very closely and have a salience in the world and that we can make a difference on, I think we ought to get involved, even if there are some associations that might be potentially compromising. Which for the Women's Christian Temperance Union was a kingdom of God on earth theology that would bring in persecution, or at least that was the fear. So I fear that Adventism basically lost that tradition. I don't fear. I mean, I know we did, right? We compromised with the mainstream. We went, and you find that the biggest tensions in this graph, interestingly enough, are on the diagonals, right? So these guys really have trouble seeing how to work together often, right? When during first of all, during World War I, we started to lose our radical edge in politics, right? We started to say, no, we don't want to have this stringent critique of America. And of course, the FBI was harassing our publishing houses and saying, you can't write these critiques of the United States and that kind of stuff. And then after World War II, we said, well, we need more mainstream acceptability. We need to get on board with the evangelicals, get recognized as being fellow evangelicals and not this fringe cult any longer. We went for mainstream acceptability, which meant ditching all of the stuff that we used to do here, right? With the exception of religious liberty, okay? And so now we have this situation where people think this is the only historic way of being Adventist, the only traditional way of being Adventist. And we're getting more and more historians saying, no, we used to do a bunch of this stuff too, right? And that's where I see the conflict coming out, right? Is we have forgotten how to hold these two things together like we used to. And we have actually allowed political cultures and in a culture war conflict to divide us and polarize us. And it's hard for people to see how you could, for example, preach that there would be an end time conflict over a final crisis over the nature of the Sabbath, right? And at the same time want to be involved with a group called Black Lives Matter or in any way, right? Even affirming the slogan. So that's where I see the situation at the moment.
In terms of looking at the apocalyptic quadrant, right? And the social justice one. What about looking at it, the apocalyptic part, from the perspective of like a Matthew 25, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm just trying to throw a passage in there, and if there's a better one that we could use, then sure. How could we balance, let's say, that one with other social justice one, just in looking at a particular passage, 25, 31 to 46, where sheep and the goat types.
The sheep and the goats, right? Mm-hmm. Well, I think that somebody who wanted to polarize this, right? Polarize across this dimension here.
Mm-hmm.
Would say that Matthew 25 is referring to individual acts of charity, right?
Oh.
And that to take on any kind of social dimension there would be to, open yourself up to some kind of future persecution because you're imposing your values on the rest of society, something like that, right? That's an argument that could be made. I'm not saying I agree with it. Clearly, I don't, right? Because I don't think that should be polarized. But that's how that could look, right? For someone who's really interested only in this kind of transcendent sanctification kind of a thing, right? Mm-hmm. And doesn't think that we need to do and really thinks that's the main purpose, and we don't have to try to heal the world in any way. In fact, to try to heal the world would be to deny the efficacy of the second coming, right? Whereas I would want to say that if you're going to preach about what heaven is without showing people what heaven will be like, you are not following Christ's method for reaching the people, right?
Oh, okay.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
To do that is to deny we people here are just happy to do it with our bodies, right? So you have to go out, and this is the ministry of healing part, right? I mean, Kellogg was all about healing the body, right? But they deny that there's an aspect of healing the body politic, right? Unless a prophet comes and literally tells them they have to do something political, someone who's polarized here wouldn't do it, right? They would say, no, that was then, prohibition was then, this is now, we don't have anything to do with that stuff anymore, right? But that seems to me to be a very, wanting to really narrow what the prophet has to say in certain aspects while widening what she has to say in others, right? It seems a very selective reading of Ellen White. It also seems to me not to be a good reading of the scriptures, right? Because we do have lots of talk in the Bible about justice and what that means and why we need to pursue it and so on and so forth. So, that's kind of how I would respond to that, right? These things don't have to be in conflict at all, right? Mm-hmm. But they can get that way when we want to think that our answer that we've found here has to be the answer that applies to all these other questions, right? It's a very selfish thing as well. Yeah.
Okay.
Did that help answer your question?
No, it did. I mean, and even if there's another passage that you could, in there, because a lot of times, when I read a passage like Matthew 25 or and the other ones, and I'm thinking about the second coming and judgment and things of that nature, for me, I am also looking at the here and now, right, and what is happening, and the fact that God is gonna consider our record here, but individuals are just living in this moment where, like you said, in terms of I need to be perfect, that type of thing, and that's it. I don't care about what is happening here, or we get the pushback on the whole idea of why are we focusing on this Black Lives Matter thing, and then they get into the arguments of, well, the organization is about homosexual issues and things of that nature. So that's why I asked the question in light of, okay, we know these things from the Bible, and we're looking forward to the second coming, and we understand issues of the judgment, right? But and of course you're a pastor, and you don't want to seem like you're off a bit, or you're leading people astray. But I think we could be balanced, or we have the ability to do both. So
yeah. These are properly hermeneutical issues, right? Which means that you're not going to find like one passage in scripture and then like, here's why you have to, you know what I mean? It's about how you put the whole picture together in light of the whole framework that you're operating in. Okay. So the reason that we adopt certain frameworks of interpretation, I want to argue, is not because of methodology, right? Methodology, people who are obsessed with methodology think that you can find some kind of almost computer algorithm that you can plug scripture into and it will spit out the right results, okay? But scripture is not meant to be read by computers. It's meant to be read by people who are working toward a whole picture of life, okay? Right. And so that's why I'm bringing out these issues to talk about what's our whole picture of life. Who are we doing life together with? What are the things we think are really important to us? And then how can we work that together into a kind of coherent Adventist movement that, maintains some connection to the center, right? Rather than just spinning out. So I think it's important to talk about how Adventism, in our community answered these kinds of questions. And then in light of where we've come from, in light of what the prophet has said to pull us back to things that were in scripture and we've ignored and all that kind of stuff, right? Let's come back to the Bible and see, okay, did God have things that he expected nations not in covenant relationship with him to do? Well, it turns out he did, right? When Nebuchadnezzar was getting arrogant and proud, what was the solution Daniel gave to Nebuchadnezzar in order to not have judgment come upon him, right? The solution was to do mercy to the poor, right? To stop abusing them, right? His arrogance had led him into, these kind of political corruptions that we're talking about now. And now apply that to ourselves living in a democracy where we have a vote, right? Where we have a voice, right? Where we can say things, right? We're each like a little tiny Nebuchadnezzar in our little community, right? Not because all the power has been decentralized. So, if we want to avert God's judgment on us, right? I think most of us have an interest in that, because God can judge a nation that gets too unjust, right? What should we do, right? Should we try to seek to relieve the burden of the oppressed? Should we try to, relieve the poor, right? Once you come to the Bible with a different set of eyes, right, that you can start to draw lessons from these passages, whereas before you would have said, well, that was then, but this is now, right? And kind of lessen the message that the Bible has for you.
David, here's a question for you.
Sure.
When I read Micah 6:8, we just read Jeremiah 22 verse 3, and there are other passages in Isaiah that I've read as well. We read Luke.
John, yeah. just before we finish, and Andrew, I know Andrew said he wanted to say something on the other article that David wrote as well, being white, and just so that we don't forget that. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. And then I read Luke. No problem. We read also Luke, where Christ speaks about why he came and what he intended to do. And we just mentioned Ellen White and some of the comments she's made towards any number of the issues that we're talking about here today. And she talks about Christ's method alone, working with the poor, those who are downtrodden, and all of these items that I think are valuable for us to do as Christians. Why is it when it comes to any of these social matters, including race issues, we say it's a political thing, or it's a political commentary, or it's we have to be careful about how our church responds to them, for example, because we don't want to be seen as too political.
The callousness and the indifference. I mean,
yeah.
Yeah.
What I saw Christ say when he came on earth in terms of his inauguration speech, Luke 4, I didn't see that as a political commentary, or I didn't see him attaching himself or committing himself to that because he intended to be political. I saw him as being a moral person, someone who responded with a moral voice, with moral clarity, with moral actions to social ills of society. So is it social, or is it moral, or is it both? Or is it a moral issue that can be affected or impacted through political means?
Yeah. With a lot of these words, there's kind of a bit of equivocation, a bit of semantics that comes into it, right? So when some people say political, what they mean is that you've like bought into a partisan program or something like this, right? Whereas when I say political, I mean it in the broadest sense of how are we doing life together, right? Wherever you have more than two people, things are going to get in some way political, because you have a community and you have to negotiate between different objectives and goals and, come together in a certain way, right? And then that involves morality, right? Because any community that's in that situation has to have a reason for existing, and that reason has to connect to what all the people agree is something that's good for them, okay? So when it comes to morality and politics, I see that very deeply bound. What we are warned against is making a political party, our primary mode of political engagement, because then that community can come in and shape your morality, right? In the primary sense, rather than your political morality being guided by Jesus Christ. So I think there is some danger then, though, as well, I will agree, in becoming immoral political causes and wanting to achieve your objectives so badly that you come to identify with a party that will support you. We've seen this happen in my country on the issue of abortion, right? Where abortion is if you accept that unborn children are people, then abortion is the single largest killer of Black lives in America, right? But when you go to identify your cause so much with a political party that you would support their candidate for president no matter what, right? That can get deeply compromising, as I think most, what I consider to be neutral observers have found, right? And now my country finds itself in a very difficult place with a president who is, just being quite divisive at the moment, as well as not able to respond to a once in a century national crisis. Okay.
Right.
This is the same problem that we get into with Kellogg here, right? Where he really wanted to do right by the white and the Black race. That was, he honestly wanted to. But the progressive idea that he bought into at the moment turned out to be very wrong, and likely led the Adventist Church in Germany into supporting Adolf Hitler. So there are always these, because he spoke about eugenics in terms of race hygiene, and that was a very, that was Hitler's terminology as well. And the Adventist Church supported him in part because Hitler supported race hygiene. So there's always those pitfalls, right? I mean, I talked earlier about prohibition, and prohibition, of course, is a dirty word now in the United States, right? I mean, it's like a total political non-starter, you know. I guess what I take it to be is at certain points there are things that are so morally wrong, right, that you have to step out to do something to make it better. And then we leave the results of that up to God. And I don't have a really, I don't have a really well worked out, agenda in this regard, but, or criteria. But it seems to me that when we find something that accords so much with our Adventist theology, which is highly concerned with freedom and liberty, in the plight of the African American people, we find something that is something where there's a popular movement that has a good chance of making a difference, and something that the Adventist Church can make an actual contribution to. At that point, I think we need to act while remaining aware of the pitfalls, but act and trust that God will honor our efforts, knowing that no political reform that we make is going to bring in everlasting righteousness. Prohibition succeeded, but it didn't bring in everlasting righteousness, right? Eventually it was repealed. I don't know. I'm rambling a bit. Does that make sense to you? Did that help answer your question?
It does. It does to some extent. I just wish that we as Adventist Christians could really be aware of the language that we use, because often the language that we use show our emphasis on one thing over another, to the minimization of other things over other, what we might consider more important things. So that's one of the reasons why. And I'll be honest with you, whenever I'm speaking about social justice to persons of different backgrounds, I hear people who are of color. They don't use political in speaking about, hey, the church needs to do something, or the church needs to say something, or what's the church's approach? Where's the church's voice? I don't hear them using the word political. I hear them using the word moral, or disciples of Christ, or we're called to fix the ills of society, that we can't fix the ills of society. We can't share the gospel or point people to an apocalyptic posture or point of view where the church is concerned, without taking care of first people's social issues. And we will always point back to Christ, who came to set captives free. He came to heal those who were blind, take care of those who were impoverished, to feed those who were hungry, to help people, so that he could then have legitimacy to invite them to follow him. He could not have had the legitimacy to invite people to follow him unless he created legitimacy through those friendships, through those acts of mercy, through those acts of the social well-being. And so for me, I think we can't have the gospel without the social part of it. Having one without the other renders us incapable of fully accomplishing the ideals set out in the gospel. If Christ came to heal and to deliver, and he says, I came to set men and women free, and if you're free in Christ, you're free indeed, because he gives true freedom. What does that true freedom look like? Isn't it a freedom that impacts and invades all of our lives, which includes the totality of ourselves, which includes the personal, which includes the things that we're experiencing that might have us down or disadvantaged. So I think when I hear those who are people of color speak about this issue, social justice, and righting wrongs, I hear them speaking about it from a moral perspective. And unfortunately, when I hear from our Caucasian brothers and sisters, I hear them speaking about it as, well, this is a very politically charged issue, or it's a political thing that I don't know if I want to get involved in. And so they use the word political or politics And so it says, well, because it's politics, I don't necessarily have to get into it. But when you use the word moral, I have to get into it. Yeah. My Christianity demands me to get into it.
Yeah.
And that's where
so not every political question is a moral question, right?
True.
There are questions of prudence. There are questions of efficiency, right? And I don't get into that stuff as a pastor, right? Does the minimum wage help or hurt low workers, right? I mean, there's a debate in economics about that, right? It's about, what are the effects of this? And I don't, but if it comes to the question of, should people have, like rights to, negotiate with their employers in certain ways or something like that. That seems to me, something that's more coming on the moral side, right? Should payday loan places be able to entrap people in exorbitant amounts of debt, right? I mean, I think that's now we're getting more moral, right? The Bible has, things to say about this. And then some things are just so egregious that they're plainly moral, right? Do police officers in my country who kill people, right, stand a reasonable chance of being convicted of a crime if that killing was unjustified, right, or not? I mean, that seems to be like very much a moral issue that we should engage on. And then we have to ask ourselves, okay, does that moral issue have a political dimension? If it does, then the morality has to come first, I think, right? And if it has that political dimension, then we have to ask ourselves, okay, can we engage in that, politically? Do we stand a chance of doing that? We speak here from a position of a bit of privilege, right? We live in countries where this kind of expression is encouraged, or at least tolerated. But if you think of persecuted churches in various countries around the world, right, they may see that it's a moral issue, that it's a political issue, but not be in a position to effectively do anything about it, right? In that political way.
Right.
This is the Roman Empire that Christ faced, right? He did things that had a political dimension to them, but he didn't directly take on the politics of the time, right?
Right.
You look at the history of the Adventist missions, the Stalls in Peru, who were working with literal peons, right? It was a peonage system. And they didn't take on the big landowners and things, but they educated the people so that at the end of the day, they were able to write their own requests to the government and, get relief from the oppression that they were suffering and things like that. So sometimes, what's needed is more education, more, building people up in that way. Sometimes, though, we can take our petition directly to the government and we have a voice, and we, this is the kind of situation that we had here in Edmonton, where we could put Black Lives Matter on our church sign. Yeah.
Right.
Awesome. In terms of BLM or Black Lives Matter, right? In another discussion, I think I made reference to it in one of our discussions, John, when we were having it on Facebook. Somebody had made a comment, and I commented on it there, and Dr. Nick Miller, said something about the fascination that individuals have with Black Lives Matter, and then and the fact that they're making reference to the fact people have other agendas and things of that nature. And he was pointing out that in the Bible, we use terms that are not necessarily like Adventists or Christians, or, we've borrowed it. Can you say something on that? In terms, one particular word he used was the logos, for example, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if you follow where I'm going with that, but
yeah, I follow where you're going. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, sometimes we can get a little bit, and this is a conservative impulse, to want to protect our identity with a unique terminology, right? So now we don't practice, I'll give you an example that you maybe learned in seminary, right? Mm-hmm. We don't practice historical criticism. We practice historical analysis of the Bible, you see, so that we can distance ourselves from what those heathens are doing, right? And we've got all this, when I was a kid, I was told we don't spell, is it holistic with a WH, we spell it with an H or something like this, so that we don't get associated with those new age people, right? Because we wouldn't want to, you know, even though a lot of what we're doing is the same kind of thing, right? With the vegetarianism and all that, you know. You know what I'm saying? So I mean, yeah, we do need to protect the sheep from the wolves. We don't want to lead people astray by saying, hey, just go out there and do whatever you know. And sometimes we do need to say specifically what we mean so that we don't introduce ambiguities that can send people down the wrong path. But the problem is, if that's all you do, then you never build those kinds of partnerships that I was talking about, right? You never work with the Women's Christian Temperance Union, right? So we have to sometimes take on the terminology that people understand in order to actually do what it is we're trying to do. And then it's up to church leaders to educate, here's exactly what we mean by this, right? And here's where we join with this movement, and here's where we don't. With respect to Black Lives Matter, I find it, I mean, you look at the groundswell of support in the United States for this movement, right? You know,
Right.
I think it jumped from like 30 to 60% or something like this. Did 30% of Americans suddenly become Marxists? You know, I don't think so, right? I think it's more likely that what that phrase means to most people is that we need to have certain kinds of police reforms, and we may disagree about what those are, but that's what we're talking about when we say Black Lives Matter. And the organization no longer speaks for everybody who's in the movement, because it just kind of got this new influx. And then why should we abandon the moral authority of that phrase to this, you know, this group of radicals, right? Maybe what we need to do is now take the moral authority of that place and apply it to some pragmatic reforms that a lot of people can get on board with and have a chance of happening. I mean, that obviously that's where I stand on it.
Here's a comment from someone in the comment section. They say, Mickey Hutchinson says, all social justice issues have moral underpinnings.
Yeah.
I think something that you were mentioning earlier. The church must practically address those issues. One need not attach self to any political party to do what Jesus would have us do. Systemic racism and the need for self-aggrandizement, have led to party affiliation.
Yeah, I mean, party affiliation is a whole other bag of worms, and where that comes from and things like that. But I agree that we need we as Christians need to be careful, very careful with our political loyalties. Make sure that our political loyalties center around the gospel and its imminent implications, and then watch out for how political parties can try to capture that and shift it. There's an article you can find on my blog called Political Polarization, Whither Adventism, something like that, where I write about the sources of political polarization in the US, and that they actually reduce down in certain ways to religious polarization that happened long before you and I were born. So a great comment.
And then another one, Kevin Messina.
That's says, my cousin. Hey, Kevin.
Oh, that's your cousin. He said several comments about natural law, etc. He says political action is great, however, it has the potential to be reduced to dust in the wind if the milieu of our mission field lacks the moral framework to receive it. Therefore, we should engage in political action and simultaneously seek to cultivate the moral framework of natural theology, natural law, and natural rights within the quote unquote social imagery of our culture.
Social imaginary, I think, is probably what he said.
Or imaginary, yes.
He's referencing Charles Taylor there. Yeah. So, yeah, good on you, Kev. Kevin is always going to promote natural law. I prefer to think of it in terms of working with the morality that's already embedded in the culture, and then trying to figure out how we can connect that to biblical morality, and then bring people along toward what God wants, right? I think when you go into any society, I'm now thinking kind of on a global level, right? Of course, because our churches in Canada are in many ways global churches, right? We have to look for the moral common ground that exists within cultures that connects to biblical morality, and then we can build on top of that a biblical vision for social justice. And my model for doing that is Paul and Mars Hill. Although he never got to the justice part, but he was connecting their morality to biblical morality in that sermon.
Right. And that's a really powerful example as well.
Yeah.
All right. In term, and we're not going to hold you too much longer, but you know, I do want you to comment on the March 13th, 2018 article that you did on your blog here, being white.
Mm-hmm.
You quoted Revelation chapter 7, 9 to 10, and then you said this: I'm going to try to do something here that white people try to avoid. Think and think out loud about what it means to be white. I'll get at why that can uncomfortably for us later on. But first, why am I doing this? What exactly were you getting at with regards to this particular fear?
You mean in terms of the discomfort?
Yes.
Yeah. I think there is a kind of, if you read about Black double consciousness, right? I think there's a kind of white double consciousness as well. When you're made aware of being white, it kind of brings up certain associations that explain things that are good about you, right? Mm-hmm. It also brings up things that are bad about you, right? And so that's, I think, where the discomfort comes from. It's a kind of a moral ambiguity, and it can be hard to resolve, knowing that white people have done so much good and also so much bad in the world. And then how do I fit within that, right? Like, what kind of a white person am I going to be? You know, and there are certain things about me that, you know, are good, that are explained in terms of me being white. Mm-hmm. Also things that are bad that are explained in terms of me being white. So it's easier to just go through the world as if you don't have a racial identity if you're white, because then you don't have to think about that stuff.
Yeah, something to say, John, you wanted?
Oh no, I was.
Yeah.
I haven't gotten to that article yet, but I will.
Right. I didn't go through it fully, because, you know, you talked about identity and, you know, the story of white identity and things that I know, and I'm not too sure what specifically Andrew wanted to ask, or something happened to his phone, so he got cut off. But, you know, can you like bring out some of the things that you wrote about in terms of you know, what you said here? So I looked at the opening, you know, comment there, but and especially as it relates to, you know, what we're dealing with right now. Why did you even write this?
Yeah. Why did I write it? I wrote it because I wanted to help my people understand how I've kind of processed my racial identity, right? Mm-hmm. And then talk about what it means to be white, and how we can be white people and be good people, right? That's kind of the whole point. Yeah. So it's kind of lengthy and you know, hopefully not too convoluted, but I first make a point about what racial identity actually is, right? Mm-hmm. Which I think a lot of people get confused on. Yeah. How all these kinds of identities are kind of historically constituted, how they're not essential. I think the trap I'm trying to avoid is essentializing white identity and saying it's about this for all time or it's about that for all time, right? Identities don't work that way. They're part of history. They have stories, right? If you want to understand something like this, you have to tell its story, okay? Mm-hmm. Then I look at kind of the two sides of white identity, you know, kind of top-down identity formation, how white people were first theorized by European elites, how they were put on top of a racial caste system, how that was about finding kind of a pan-European identity and getting beyond the ethnic conflicts that kind of divided Europe. So if you want to look at that in biblical prophetic perspective, right, white identity was a way to try to avoid the feat of iron and clay, right? We can reunite, you see. But then I talk about how it's kind of, that was then appropriated by people also from below, right? So that people coming to the New World who had really fraught relationships with their ethnic identity, could put that behind them and now just be white, right? And not have to worry about whether we're Dutch or English or German or French or Russian or whatever you will, right? Of course, in Canada, that didn't play out that way, but in America, it largely has. So that helped them to get beyond their past in certain ways that were good. Also looking at the history of certain white uplift movements in the civil rights era and how they cooperated as white people with Black civil rights movements as well, showing that white identity, even though it was birthed in racial hierarchy, is not essentially racist. It doesn't have to be. If white people can just see themselves as being along with everybody else, right? That's sort of what I'm arguing for. White identity isn't that special, right? It's not it's not at the vanguard of history, either in terms of modern improvement or in terms of anti-racism. What we need to do is learn to just take a seat at the table along with everybody else, not be behind or before, but just, and I kind of relativize that to the worship of the risen Lord. So that what we need to do is then take our place around the throne in worship, right? We're not going to be leading the choir, right? We're not going to be in the back because of all the bad stuff we did. It's just there with everybody else. And what that does then for me is I guess what I do with all the rest of my identities as well, or what I try to do is hide them behind the cross, right? So that what is cross-shaped in my whiteness comes out, which is cross-shaped being self-sacrificial love, right? It's taught me to love people in certain ways. And then what doesn't fit with that has to go, right? Out of my whiteness, right? There's things that I have to deal with because I'm white that are not helping me be loving in the way that Jesus was loving. So that's more or less in a nutshell. You've asked me to summarize a lot of writing in a short time. I hope I've done it some justice.
Oh, that's fine. No, and here's why I was even asking that question, because you have right now, once again, with the social uprising and focus on racism and all that, and all these different things, and getting rid of statues, you have a situation where what's come to the forefront now is the Revelation image, or Revelation chapter 1 image of Christ. And folks are bringing up this whole idea of, why have we always had this particular image of him? He doesn't look like this, and all the, I was just sort of mixing in. I don't know if you've even heard of it, but, getting rid of that particular image of Christ and it's not. So that's one of the reasons I was bringing it up. Andrew's trying to cut back in here, but yeah.
Oh, here he comes. Okay, great.
There he is.
I'll respond to that while he connects in. I have written an article. If you go to the comments on that piece on my blog, I've written an article for Compass Magazine again, asking whether we will all be white in heaven. There's some comments Ellen White makes about us all being white in heaven. And what does that mean? So I deal with that in terms of the risen Lord. So you can read that at your leisure as well. Right. In terms of portrayals of Jesus, I mean, you just look around the world. Every Christian group has portrayed Jesus as looking like them. Going right back to our earliest portrayals of Christ, he doesn't look like what we think a Palestinian Jew of his time would have looked like. He, in our earliest portrayals of Christ, he looks like the people who were painting him, and we do that. The problem is if there's like a white hegemony over those images. I think that's what needs to go. We don't know what the historical Jesus looked like. What's his name? Nathan Green, the Adventist artist who does a lot of illustrations, right? I happen to have gone to church with him for the last 5 years or so. His model that he uses for Jesus is Cuban. Okay, so that's a lot of Adventist Jesus now is going to be Cuban.
So I mean there is an article that talks about historians or archaeologists who they used some form or silhouette or something like that to create what Jesus could have looked like.
Yeah,
and kind of looked like a dark Cuban indeed.
Yeah. Well, he's got this really round face, right?
Yeah, it's really round. Yeah.
They analyzed all these skulls from Palestine and figured out what the average Jewish male would have looked
Right.
like, and did the facial reconstruction stuff. And yeah, it's kind of but we have such a long-faced Jesus in our imaginations. I don't know if we will ever get away from that, but I think we need to have a diversity of Christ images. And if there's a white Jesus hanging in my church that really offends somebody, I wouldn't be opposed to taking it down. But I don't think that portraying Jesus as white is necessarily wrong. Then I think that would be relegating white people to the back of the choir, right? Like, I think having white Jesus is okay, but we just need to have lots of other portrayals of him as well, especially in multicultural churches. Yeah.
Right.
All right, Andrew, you wanted to ask something, sir? We're at the point now.
I can sense the laugh in your voice. I just want you to know. I was subjected to the age of my car today.
You need to get an iPhone, bro.
I knew more than that. When charging the phone was apparently overheating, so it shut down everything.
Oh yeah, that'll do it. Oh yeah,
that's great.
That AC, I feel the struggle, man.
Yep, exactly.
Well, with iPhone, we've got an internal cooling system.
No one has. Nobody has.
I'm just joking.
That's it. By the way, I just when I came in on the discussion, I just want you to know I actually endorse the Cuban Jesus because I am half Cuban.
Oh, hey, well done.
Right.
You can identify with that Jesus.
I can. I actually, if you said you know the guy, I can take a picture of myself and send it. I don't know if whatever.
I'll ask him if he's open to model.
A model. Fair enough.
Your cousin says that we will all be quote unquote white as snow because all will be washed in the blood.
That is one sense in which Ellen White talks about being white in heaven. That's one sense. Yeah, that's probably the primary sense. So that's what I argue. Yeah,
that is hilarious. I don't know if you guys were able to spend any time to talk about your article.
Which one?
The being white article.
Yeah, so that's we just
I just recapitulated it in very brief terms.
Okay, fair enough. Funny enough, I had it up on my phone and I lost it, of course. Great art. I did mention that it's a great article, and I wanted to find out I guess a couple of things. Mm-hmm. Number one, what were your personal emotions when writing it, when writing the article? Because you're writing from a Caucasian standpoint, and you're writing about the fact that you're going to talk about something that is an uncomfortable topic. Something, and the uncomfortable topic is thinking about being white, like really thinking aloud about being white. How did you feel? I'm gonna be emotional with you right now. So
yeah, this article, when you're in a doctoral program and you decide to write something like this, it's really in your spare time. You're like, I'm laying in bed late at night. It's like fire in your bones,
yes,
that's sort of where I was at. It was like, I have no other choice. I have to get this out here. I at the time I had felt really compelled to, read some stuff that took me to another level in my understanding of my own racial identity. I'd kind of gotten there, and then I was seeing conversations happening and just saying, I have to put this out. So that was more or less my feeling at the time. And, that's more or less the feeling out of which a lot of these articles that you see me writing recently have come from. It's like, how can I be silent?
Right. And I appreciate it. I appreciate it because it helps to put in perspective. It's not a hate against white people, and it's not a hate against any other race. It's a look at the very terms of of cultures and racial constructs. And when you look at it that way, it puts things into perspective as to why these social constructs were developed, who they were developed by, a small majority that has money. Even now in societies, the way it works, the rich and famous, they speak the loudest just because they have the largest influence. Oprah Winfrey says she hates beef and she gets sued by the beef industry because beef sales went down. However, Justin Bieber gets praised because he says he likes O. Henry's and their sales go through the roof, right? It's just because of those with money and power at the time. They needed to develop based on what your article is, it basically is saying they developed this whole idea of racial constructs to help with the divide and to help show their superiority. It's like there's a way that we need to put it that shows why we are better. There must be something that shows that we are better. I felt the article touched me especially because I grew up in a multicultural area. I knew I was Black, and some of my best friends, we were called ourselves the T family. I don't know if I mentioned it on the chat before, but the T family it was John Tang and Christopher Thomas, and Christopher was Greek, John was Chinese, I was West Indian, well, Canadian West Indian, and we were the best of friends. Went to each other's house, ate each other's food, introduced them to curry, they loved it.
Your phone is breaking up a bit, Andrew.
Yeah.
You
might need to move a little closer to your Wi-Fi router or something.
I feel like I may. Hold on a second. Let me try that. Let's see.
He's close to his outlet.
I'm so hurt right now. Let's see if this works.
It's clear. You're clear. And we can see you.
And we can see you better too.
Okay. That's better. The lighting is...
There's that Cuban. There's the Cuban side there.
There's the Cuban. That's it. How many have you had an opportunity to share this article beyond, writing it online? Have you ever been approached about it? Has anyone else ever talked to you about it other than us? In terms of, I don't know, the authenticity of it, the thought-provoking issues that it brings out. Has anybody, especially Caucasian, ever spoken to you about it?
Yeah. I have talked about it with white people.
Okay.
Not very often.
Yeah.
And I don't think I'm really at liberty to get into those conversations. Again, it's a sensitive subject. There have been people who've denied to me that they even are white, right? No, I'm not white. So it's been kind of going through like some of the fundamental philosophical basis on which I build the argument, right? Mm-hmm. I'm building it out of kind of, I guess, what you might call a kind of a Heideggerian approach to philosophy.
Okay.
So I'm going a step back from where critical theory might be, which might want to reduce everything to power relationships, right? And I'm saying, no, I think there's more going on there than just that. I don't want to deny the power relationships, but I want to say that there's more happening. But there's people who want to be more, I guess, analytic than continental in their philosophy, if we can, throw out those terms. Continental philosophy is wanting to do kind of more narrative, all philosophy is kind of based on intuitions, but I would say more of a narrative approach to philosophy, more talking about how our various backgrounds shape how we think about things and things like that, right? Whereas analytic philosophy wants to clarify our categories, really clear in categories, and that that tends to lead toward a more timeless approach to things, right? So as I was explaining to the gentleman before, what I'm really trying to do is avoid a trap called essentialism, which is saying like, this is what the identity has to mean for all of time, right? Whereas these things are really defined by their stories, okay? By it's a narrative continuity rather than a timeless one thing that this has to mean continuity. So yeah, I've had some of those discussions with Black people as well who have objected to me saying that there's anything redeemable in white identity. Where I want to say no, it's not. Let's not essentialize it in that way. But yeah, that's kind of been the objections I've had. But I haven't ever. This is probably the largest platform I've ever talked about this kind of thing on. Largest audience, rather, I should say. Yeah.
And yeah, anything else, Andrew? We gotta let the preacher go, man. John.
No, I get it. I'm gonna let. I appreciate the time that he spent with us and that we were able to spend together.
We more than appreciate it, and
it's been fun.
Thanks for coming on. You're a busy man, but we really appreciate you coming on and chatting with us.
I really appreciate the
openness as well, your authenticity.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, guys. I really appreciate the invitation. I appreciate the questions. I hope this has been helpful to you. Let me know in the comments if there's any pushback or anything people want to discuss. I'm not like the last word on any of these matters.
There's always pushback.
Good.
All right. Take care, Facebook. I'm gonna sign off now.